Good evening. Again, I'm Teri Szafran. I'm the Director of Exceptional Student Education. The programs that I'm responsible for serve children from pre-K age all the way to age 22, every disability category as well as gifted students. When students become eligible under special education law for services as a student with a disability, there are different rights and protections that go along with that eligibility that in regard to discipline. So when we have students who are referred for pretty extreme behaviors or repeated behaviors within a school setting, a meeting is held to look at that student's pattern of behaviors and the services they've already been receiving under their individual education plan. What I went and wanted to look at through our history is a little bit of how many numbers of students are we moving into different placements as a result of those behavioral referrals and those meetings that we hold on our students with disabilities. Consistently over the last 5 or so years for middle school, we look at different types of placements for somewhere between mid-20s and early 30s, so like 26 to 32 students per year at the middle school level with disabilities. We refer for looking at another placement for those students based solely on disability. For high school, we're looking in the mid-30s to low 40s, so between 35 and 42 students a year being moved to a different type of discipline setting. Those numbers may be significant to you, they may not be, but to me it spoke volumes because in our district approximately 15% of our students are identified as having a disability. So in a population of a little over 40,000 students, that means that we have a little over 6,000 students by most years identified as students with disabilities. So when we're looking at 40 to 60 students a year who get referred to a different type of placement, many of which we've already discussed tonight, those numbers are relatively small. As Lisa and Vicki both said, we continue though to strive to see what we can do to improve that situation. And what we've been doing over this past year in particular is looking very closely at the services that we provide to our students who demonstrate emotional and behavioral disabilities, and looking at other approaches that we can take as opposed to what we've traditionally done with those students. And you've probably heard the terminology trauma-informed care if you've been to any community events recently. We certainly have been looking into all of the trauma-informed care training. Avis will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We have been participating in the community events with the Vision Council, which Lisa and I are members of, which looks at those trauma events and mental health and behavioral services to very young children, primarily those children prior to their school years, to make sure that we're having a voice in that council as well, and that we know what's going on in the community with our very young students. We are trying to have a voice at the table with as many different groups as we can. We recently were part of a panel discussion with the pediatricians at Grand Rounds, so we can hear what the doctors have to say about concerns with behavioral health and mental health and trauma and chronic stress with very young children as well. So that's one thing that we've been focusing on. I know that the League of Women Voters sponsored the showing of Paper Tigers recently. We also showed Paper Tigers to all of our administrative staff at principals meeting last week to make sure that they had the opportunity to see that and to have some time to talk and debrief about that movie and the trauma-informed approach that's being taken with high school students in that particular film. And we've started already talking with principals about how they might start to embed some of that practice or study some more about that practice and learn about what might be appropriate on their campuses to start to embed that type of philosophy with their faculties and the way that students are treated in the schools and the relationships that are fostered there. Many of us have also sat on the Achieve Escambia presentation. We're really excited about the community involvement with our students and knowing that the problems that children bring to school are much bigger than what just happens at school. There are some children who have things that most people would consider insurmountable that they're dealing with on a daily basis, and they just bring those problems right with them, and then they show themselves in a different way sometimes at school. And so we're trying to do the very best we can to educate ourselves in a more trauma-informed approach to how we manage some of what we're seeing in behavior with children at school, and certainly in the realm of special education. This becomes very, very important in how we're training our teachers in our classrooms and working with the therapists that provide assistance. The other thing I'd like to mention briefly, and I'm going to try not to step too much on the toes of the ladies beside me because we have a lot of similar efforts that we work on, is we invest a lot of money into the services we provide our students in the district. Our contract with Lakeview Center alone is in excess of $1.2 million. That allows us to provide counseling services to students in our schools, to provide some outpatient services, which Lisa can address a little more of, and to provide the school that we run over at the Lakeview campus, the school day support school, which has embraced trauma-informed practices completely wholeheartedly, as well as looking at other types of interventions for students who are that extreme with their need. Their needs are so significant that they require something that intensive. So we have looked at an approach that takes a more sensory approach with our students, looking at the use of calming rooms, for example, for students who need that, the integration of some movement types of activities for students who need that kind of outlet, with our OTs and PTs being great supports in that area, and expanding what we've typically thought of as therapeutic approach in that particular setting. And the interesting thing about that is that the OTs and other staff members have become so excited they're actually spreading that into what we consider more traditional school settings, and we're starting to see the approaches expand in that capacity in other schools as well. Lisa?